Welcome back to The Dominator, hosted by Player Profiler. I am your host, Billy Muzio. With me today, I have one of the best rankers in the world, Jake Ciely. Jake Ciely is a senior fantasy writer over at The Athletic Fantasy. He is an award-winning analyst and among the best in the fantasy football rankings in the community. He has had multiple top 5 football finishes and baseball accuracies, including multiple first-place finishes. And the most important piece, he is a ducktail lover.
There you go.
Jake, welcome to the pod. Excited to talk some projections with you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. It's never too early for these, as you and I were talking about before we even jumped on here.
That's right. You know, we're in May. I've done this every month now with somebody talking through projections, talking through rankings. As always, we would like to say these are subject to change at any time. So if you're watching this in August, it might be outdated. However, it is still fun to discuss. And I'm just excited to start talking about some of these backfield situations, some of these receivers. There's a lot going on here that I'm excited that we're going to break down.
Yeah, it's always like the just don't watch this in August is what we should really say. It's like they're gonna be like, why do you have this person on this team? Like, well, this is what happens when we're doing it early. But this is for the early drafters, which there's still way too many of them.
Yeah, we're in May. We're diehards. The underdog fantasies and the FFPCs, they've brought out the most degenerate people in the world, including myself, in drafting and creating these monster teams prior to knowing any of the landing spots, prior to knowing any of the schedule. That's the fun part about it. It's the wild, wild west, and that's what we love drafting.
Yeah, so that catch-22. It's like you're way ahead of the curve on the undervalued players, but then by August, you might have 2 or 3 guys that aren't even playing anymore because they blew their ACL.
That's right. That's part of football, though. Well, let's before we hop in it, let's get a quick read from one of our sponsors.
Oh, I'm wearing Cody's hat in honor of Cody Carpentier. He has finished the rookie guide. It is a masterpiece, the best rookie guide you will read that combines both real NFL draft analysis and fantasy analysis. This guy goes deep. I mean, do you know who Tyon Evans is? This man wrote up and ranked 40 running backs, 40 wide receivers, 15 quarterbacks, and 23 tight ends. 23 tight ends? Yes, he did. Yes, he did. We've got fantasy rookie draft cheat sheets for Superflex and single quarterback to go along with these write-ups that include analytics player comps and play style player comps. All the stats you need, the analysis you need to understand what kind of impact these guys are going to have in the NFL and for your fantasy team. So go to playerprofiler.com, go to any player page, go to the NFL draft section, and click the button to get the rookie guide. It's just $10. That's it. That's all. It's not the most expensive, but it is the best.
Cody did a phenomenal job with that thing. I am not a rookie prospect analyst, and my process starts once they land on teams, and I can start kind of deciphering the code and figuring out the matrix and what type of involvement they're going to have. But it was amazing to see like how deep he went in that guide, and I had to Google players' names because I didn't even know them, right? And try to figure out who they were and go into the system and see their college performance. And it's impressive when you go that deep inside of a rookie guide.
I used to do the same thing, honestly, and then I pulled myself back. I'm like, I give him credit for doing that because I know how it feels. I used to do the 120 and 130, and I was like, you know what? I don't even care about these like 1,700 undrafted players that nobody's like, yeah, it's cool. And you're like XFL. I know that guy. But then like for me, I'm like, I can't do it anymore. So I'm down to 75 this year. So I give him a ton of credit for that, for still sticking with it.
Well, let's hop into a rookie that everyone does care about, and that is Bijan Robinson. So Bijan got drafted with pick 108 here in the 2023 draft by the Atlanta Falcons. Many of us had him projected to land here. Arthur Smith wanted his Derrick Henry in Atlanta. They love to run the ball. However, there is just a few things that I just can't get over. One, ADP has him at RB2 right now, which is extremely high in my opinion. ECR, expert consensus ranking, has him as RB5. You and I are seeing things a little bit more eye to eye here. So Jake's ranking is RB8, mine is RB7. We have a similar vision in how we think this is going to work out. Please tell me and the listeners why the masses are wrong in drafting him RB2.
Really what it comes down to is just let's be real about what he is, his landing spot, the offense, most importantly. So what I look at with Bijan Robinson is not that he's not a bell cow, not a workhorse. I mean, we all know he's one of the generational talents. So like we know how good he is. But I don't expect the Falcons to necessarily use him in the passing game enough. Like, so my comp for fantasy, so I do two things is like to go back to that rookie guy things. I like to talk about like, what do you expect the fantasy production comp to be? So like, well, somebody might be Mike Evans production. That doesn't mean they're necessarily Mike Evans, the player. I think that kind of gives people an idea. So what I said for Bijan Robinson for fantasy only, he's Nick Chubb ceiling. And when I say that is because I think really as a rookie, he's probably going to fall into that mid-20s, maybe 30 to 35 receptions. And that's the biggest catch here is because, yes, he should be a bell cow. Yes, Arthur Smith is going to give him 300, almost 350 touches, but the majority is going to come in the run game. Desmond Ridder probably not going to check down to the running backs a lot. And if so, why are we still ignoring the fact Cordell Patterson hasn't gone anywhere? Tyler Algier is going to get sprinkled in. So it's not that I dislike Bijan Robinson. I mean, I had him clearly the number one running back in this draft class. He's been one of the best of the past 5-6 years. But when you look at it, when it comes down to projections, I actually do have his done. I have him for 1,361 rushing yards. That's like, people will be like, wow, then how do you not have him RB2? I have him for 12 rushing touchdowns. And people are like, wow, how do you have him not RB2? Because I have him for 210 receiving yards and 30 receptions and 1 receiving touchdown. I think it comes down to the offense, the scoring of the offense, the number of plays they're going to run because they are going to be so run heavy. And that's really what it comes down to. So the guys in the front of him, like Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley, Austin Eckler's of the world, even Josh Jacobs, it just comes down to he's not quite there yet. Maybe in another year with this offense, maybe Ridder develops as people hope, but it just comes down to we have to be reasonable about like the touch and the touchdown equity when it comes down to it. Did you have that queued up?
I did have it queued up. Thank you. Like this is logical. Like I people are like RB2, he's gonna have 100 targets. I'm like, he's on the Falcons, right? That's like a 25% target share. Like it wouldn't happen in this offense. Like this expected pass volume in my projection is the lowest in the league. I have it projected for 499 pass attempts. 497 is like their 2-year expected rate. And so they are literally at the bottom of the league. We have them Atlanta bottom. We have Tennessee number 2, Chicago number 3, and that's with the proposed efficiencies with the new offense. And so Bijan Robinson, like you said, generational talent, even though that word is not thrown around generationally anymore. It's every year someone's generational talent. But nonetheless, he is a generational talent. But it breaks down, just like you said, it's the passing volume. It's the amount of work they have. They still have an alpha Drake London. They still have Kyle Pitts, who's coming off injury. Like you mentioned, they still have Cordell Patterson. And yes, he's not this exceptional running back, but we saw his usage in the passing game. We saw his usage on the ground, and it's not like that's just going to completely disappear. We saw Tyler Algier eclipse 200, carries last year. And so it's not like he's going to completely disappear. So people hate to look at the raw numbers and the facts that, yes, these backs are less of a talent than Bijan, but they still are on the team and they're still going to have a role. And it's not as if that role is going to be completely gone just because they took him 108. Yes, it's an early draft pick. Yes, the draft capital is there. Yes, the talent is there. Everything would say that they're going to give him the ball this amount of times. But Nick Chubb is perfect because if Nick Chubb just caught like 10 to 15 more passes a year, he'd be like RB2 every year, RB3. But it's
how many years have we wanted that?
Yeah, it's this might be the year now. No Kareem Hunt, right? It's like I've had to like temper my expectations for Chubb this year because I feel like it's going to be the year now. But Bijan's the same thing. So I have him projected for, and I've felt like this was generous. I have him for 50 targets and 37.3 receptions. So I'm really close to you there. I have him as 7. You have him as 8. That's probably a difference of 1 or 2 catches. And so I don't have him as high on the ground. I have him for 1,200 rushing yards and 9.8 rushing touchdowns. It's a pretty conservative number. But even if I bumped him up to 10, 11, he's still going to come in as RB6, 7. So it's RB2, in my opinion. You're drafting him above the ceiling. We are now I got like a Twitter argument with a troll the other day. I'm like crying out loud. How do people not understand this? And he said he's only going to go up. I'm like, he's fucking RB2. You can't go up much higher than 2. You can go to 1. That's it. So
I think that's the biggest thing that you're kind of like putting in there is something I say every single year is I say don't buy at peak value. Now that's hard to get away from when you're talking about first round. I mean, how much improvement can you get at first round, but you can still talk about first round when you're talking about Bijan Robinson being RB2 versus Nick Chubb or even Derrick Henry or Tony Pollard and Najee Harris, like all these ones like at the end of the first round with, yeah, it would take a lot to break right for them to be RB2, but so would it for Bijan. You're actually buying everything to break right for Bijan Robinson to be 2. You're giving yourself no return on investment possibility.
That's the exact phrase I like to use. We have to look at return on investment. Whenever we draft players, it's just like the stock market. If you are able to get a return on that investment, like Deebo Samuel going in around 9 a couple years ago, like when you get somebody who's now performing at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rounds ahead of where you draft them, that's how you're winning leagues. The ceiling for Bijan is RB2. The floor is RB12, RB13.
Yeah.
And so you are now putting yourself in a very bad spot as an investment standpoint of getting a return on that player and where you took him. So I am out on Bijan Robinson as RB2. Another RB I want to talk about today is Aaron Jones from the Green Bay Packers. In my rankings, I have him as RB12. You have him as RB20. So we do have an 8-spot gap here. ECR is split down the middle, RB15, and ADP is floating right there as well, RB16. Curious as to why you're as low on Jones, assuming it's Aaron Rodgers and the offense, but walk me through what you think is going to happen in this offense and how you project this to look.
Yeah, with the move away from Rodgers, I know a lot of people think that they're going to run more, which I don't necessarily have a problem with. But we're also talking about the team as like mid-pack last year. They ran a decent amount. They're like, I think 15th. So they're just right there in the middle. Even if they do run a little bit more, my takeaway in like going through rejections, the Packers aren't 100% done for me, but they're mostly done. To give you an idea, I have from 194 rush attempts. That's not that far off for Aaron Jones. When it comes down to, I still have A.J. Dillon getting 40%. And we also saw A.J. Dillon be less than what we expected as a whole. The entire community expected more from A.J. Dillon last year. There was a big reason people were taking A.J. Dillon in like the 6th or even 7th round saying like, hey, what if Aaron Jones misses any time at all? Or they're just going to continue to share that backfield. But what it comes down to go back to the rushing upside is I really do think the biggest loss here is that people are expecting Jordan Love to factor in. And now Jordan Love is not even going to be Daniel Jones, but he's going to do more on the ground than Aaron Rodgers did. So you take that percentage away, and I kind of have Aaron Jones checking in at his same percentage of workload. But even with that tick up in the rushing, it's still going to affect them when it comes down to also, again, go back to the same thing with Bijan Robinson. How effective is the scoring offense now? So I do have a lower touchdown per rush share for this team this year. I just think that comes in hand with Jordan Love now under center. And really what it comes down to is I'm looking at, so I have Aaron Jones. Again, these are like, there's a few ancillary, like I could basically say this because the ancillary running backs are not going to rank RB 16, 17 or anything. Aaron Jones is sandwiched right now for me between Joe Mixon and Breece Hall, because I think Breece Hall might come off to a slow start with that injury. Talk about that, like the Saquon Barkley year, like 100% by the end of September. But I say that to say, like I have Cook, Etienne, Mixon, Jones, Hall, Walker. They're all in with not even 10 points of each other over the course of the full season.
Clustered.
Yeah. So one touchdown, as you brought up with Bijan Robinson, and all of a sudden Aaron Jones is 5 spots higher for me. But my biggest concern is the Green Bay Packers efficiency offense. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, I have that group clustered as well. I mean, Aaron Jones, Kenneth Walker, Breece Hall, Joe Mixon, Travis Etienne, they're all separated by like 10, 12 fantasy points. It can go either way, quite frankly. I do expect Green Bay to run a lot more 12 personnel. That's where I'm going with this. I think that we'll also see a little bit more dump offs to Aaron Jones. He saw a 13+% target share last year. I think it was 13.4. I don't have him projected quite that high. I have him at 11.5 because I do expect this offense to be less efficient. But I do have a little bit more in the rushing. Not a lot, though. It's not like I went, crazy on the rushing. I don't have him eclipsing 200 attempts. I just have him
rushing touchdowns.
Yeah, rushing touchdowns like 6.7. No, 5.3. 5.3.
we're,
Sorry.
we're almost in lockstep there then. So I guess, is it the passing side then? What do you have on the passing side?
Yeah, so the passing side, I have 67 targets. I have for 51 receptions and then 357.
Okay, so
yards.
here's the answer. Wait. This is crazy. For 67 targets, 51 receptions, 381 receiving yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns. It sounds like what the difference is not necessarily Aaron Jones. And this is good. This is it's the people around him. It's the people around. So like I probably have a few people just in front of him that you might have behind him. I'm guessing one of them might be J.K. Dobbins, but like stuff like that. Like, so I think this is good to have these kind of discussions where people might just hear us. And if we only focus on Aaron Jones, it almost sounds like we're on different pages, but we're actually pretty close.
We're really close. Yeah. We're like we're within a couple catches. So yeah, this is we're like spot on in terms of numbers. Yeah, that's good to hear. Yeah, it's just funny. So we just have super tight clusters in both of our rankings. And like you mentioned, like, so you mentioned Dobbins. Where do you have Dobbins? I have like, he's in this cluster too, but he's towards the bottom of the cluster.
It's interesting. So this is where it comes down to rankings versus projections. And this is kind of ties into everything we're talking about here today. So for rankings, I would rank him in the next tier. I would rank him in a tier with like Dalvin Cook and the risk right now, like right now, as of today, not going what's going on ahead. Miles Sanders, like, is he going to be a bell cow with Carolina? Like, baby, Joe Mixon, risk there. So he's in that group. But projections wise, he actually checks in as RB12 for me. So there's the difference. Yeah. So I have like, I would draft him at RB17 because it goes to the risk factor. Is like, I don't need to draft him at RB12. I could draft him at RB17 and still get him before most people are going to be taking him. But it comes down to that risk factor because for me, for Dobbins, it comes down to, and this is why it's always fun for you and me and people like us to look at projections. I actually even did a double take when I saw this. My projections came out for 13 rushing touchdowns. So Dobbins is very touchdown heavy, very touchdown reliant. You go back to the Mark Ingram year where he finished top 10 with this offense with only 200 rush attempts. But that's what it comes down to. That's probably, it's scary to look at, and I hate like relying on touchdowns like that. But if anybody was going to do it, I think it'd be J.K. Dobbins. That stretch at the end of the year was amazing. I'm sorry, we completely sidebarred on J.K.
No,
Dobbins
it's fine.
here.
I love talking projections, so I'm fine doing whatever you want to talk about. Yeah, he really was impressive. I mean, he was like one-legged too. Like you saw him like on a breakaway. So this was an impressive part about it. He had the third highest breakaway run rate in the league at over 10%, 10.9, almost 11%. And when he was running down the sideline, you saw like a hitch. Like he wasn't fully healthy, and he was still breaking away runs and scoring. And so he came in really high in my original run, and I kind of tempered it a little bit. I need to probably go back through since Lamar's back. We got Monken. We know the team's going to be running the ball as just as much. And so this is a good discussion because I probably need to go back and take a look at Dobbins again because I haven't done it yet. Because I did like him. He did come in high in the projections. I kind of tempered it back because there was uncertainty in the offense, and I haven't had a chance to go back through and update it yet. So I'm actually making a note right now, Dobbins.
You're making go back on Dobbins.
This is why we have these conversations.
I will say, you said you like take things back and like double. So I go back to this, and this isn't a victory lap. This is this point out like sometimes you, me, anybody, we can overthink ourselves. Is the year that Lamar Jackson won the MVP. My projections spat him out as QB1. I had a podcast where I was talking about that, and I was like, that's insane. Like I even sat there and I was like, I gotta pull him back. And I pulled him back to like QB3 or 4 that year. I should have just left it alone. Like, so like sometimes like trust the process of like the 76ers, but maybe that's not the best all the time.
Yeah, I like trusting the process too, but it's usually like if I have just a hunch on somebody and then I move them because of uncertainty, it's like I'm going to bet on the talent, right? I'm going to bet on the fact that we know he's good. He's exceptional. He just had an injury. He's finally a year removed from that injury. Like there's a lot less uncertainty now, especially now that Lamar's back and is going to create running lanes. And so now that uncertainty is resolved, it allows me to go back to my original process and boost it back up a bit because I like manually tweaked it down. It's like it was like 21 when I won the pre-draft rankings, and I take bold stands. Like I had Debo in the top 20. I had Eckler RB2 that year, and so it all went right. But if I would have missed, it would have looked like it would have been horrible. Right. And so, but I agree that we have to take stands, especially that's what's going to separate us. Like we have to look at it and say, no, the process is right. I liked what I did. I went through. It makes sense to me. I'm going to leave it. Right. But in this scenario, I know I need to adjust it. All right. Back to the show sheet. Let's move on to David Montgomery because we're kind of in lockstep here with Aaron Jones, and it's just a matter of the clusters around him. So David Montgomery, I have RB24, you have RB31. Again, ECR splitting us 27 ECR, ADP at 25, a little closer to where I have him projected. I project this to be very similar to last year, although it looks like we're both high on Gibbs. I have him as 18. I believe you had him as 19. The difference is our RB2 here, how much we think they're going to be involved. So I'm curious what your projections are for David Montgomery. I haven't projected in that Jamal Williams role last year. I kind of think that they stick to that lightning and thunder, but use a little bit more lightning this year because Swift was non-existent last year. But think David Montgomery is a much better back than Jamal Williams is in this point in his career. We've seen Montgomery's involvement in the passing game. We know he can be efficient in short yardage. Walk me through your projections with him.
So, yeah, that comes down to, I think you can have, it's not mutually exclusive to say he's Jamal Williams' role, but to expect that kind of touchdown success is kind of insane. So, like, we can like both. And I will 100% for him, I actually do have Detroit completely done. Detroit for David Montgomery, I have 211 rush attempts and for 892 rushing yards, 8 rushing touchdowns. That's the key right there. So, that's kind of that's David Montgomery actually with a little boost in touchdown efficiency compared to what he's been before. Because the 3 years, 889, 849, 801, it's 6, 8, and 5. That's David Montgomery. So if the Detroit Lions help him and boost that touchdown share on like a per touch basis, he gets to 11, 12. I'm looking right now. So like he's in the 180 something range. If he gets 3 more touchdowns, he would jump up to actually right around Aaron Jones. So I think it just really comes down to what kind of touchdown success do you expect?
Well, what do you have in the passing game? I think that's where different because you actually haven't projected for half a touchdown more than I do. I think our
35, 261 and 1.
35,
5, 266 and 1. 35 receptions, 266 yards, and 1 receiving touchdown. I don't have a lot. I don't love David Montgomery as a pass catcher.
Yeah, I only have him for 25 receptions for 225 and 1.5. So we're very close. So I think it's in our yards per carry. Then what do you have him? You have him for like 4 yards per carry.
His exact. I can even give you. I told you he's completely done. I can go to his team and tell you my exact yards per carry. My exact
4.2. His expected rate was
2. So it's just more.
We're clustered.
This is another one. Well, okay. So let's talk again. Let's look at this tier. And this is, as a sidebar to, again, do another one for everybody, but this is, people want to know how to draft better. So when I drop off from Gibbs, there's a big drop. There's an 8-point difference from Gibbs to the next running back. So as of right now, and that's pretty significant for us. It's not even a point per game, but you can see the biggest gap because then I go 190, 189, 188, 188, 186, 185, 185, 184, 182, and David Montgomery's in that mix. So again, this might go back to the similar conversation we had before, where we might agree on David Montgomery projections wise, but where he checks in at the ranks, it comes down to so to go back to Gibbs. I take Akers. I can't believe I'm doing this again, but at least we don't have to take Akers in the 4th round this year. That's the good thing.
8 and 9 this year.
I know. So I have Akers. I have Rashad White. That one doesn't feel good to my stomach. I probably won't add any of Rashad White shares at this point. You want to talk about a team that feels like they might screw up everything with like that is like bring back Leonard Fournette or even sign Ezekiel Elliott, which doesn't make sense for their tanking, but that's a complete sidebar there. But like the Ken Walkers of the world. Yeah, sidebar to sidebar. Isaiah Pacheco, I take because I would trust him in the Chiefs offense. So that's what it comes down to is just a few names where you could argue in this same tier, you prefer David Montgomery. And I won't sit here and be like, you're crazy because you're in the same tier.
Yeah, I have, Pacheco and Montgomery within like 3 points, but Montgomery's slightly ahead. I got,
so there you go.
Connor, a couple points ahead. And so, it sounds like it's another, just a tier of their own here. There's a big drop off for me from Madison to like who's RB27 in my projections to Swift and then AJ Dillon and Brian Robinson. There's at that point it's almost 9 points, and so that's where it teeters on that back end RB2 to like the high end RB3.
My biggest gap is all the way down at RB 35 and 36 from Penny to Jeff Wilson. It's a 15-point drop. So that's my biggest. That's the biggest gap I have of that's actually, if you think about it, that's a huge gap, almost a point per game.
Yeah. That is massive. Yeah, I don't have that big of a one. I have another 9 point at RB 34 to 35, but
Right
not
around the same
50.
range. Yeah.
Yeah, it's P Ryan to cook for me.
Doesn't everybody listening want to get involved in making your own projections? Isn't this fun?
Which
But this
is
is no, and all kidding, like not to like promote myself, but this is why I did this 2 years ago. Is I put my projections customized sheet so you can download it, and because all the percentage numbers are in there for every single team. Is because if you're like sitting here listening, you're like, hey, Billy and Jake are crazy. Like David Montgomery's going to get 65%. He's going to get all the touchdown at the goal line, and you can go in there, change the numbers, and be like, oh my god, look, David Montgomery's RB5. Like so, I mean.
We did this on a podcast. We did this live because someone was calling me out saying that Jahmyr Gibbs, I had too low in the projections and that Gibbs was going to see 60% of the rushing share. And I'm like, okay, first and foremost, a rookie's not going to see 60% of the share. That's like Derrick Henry volume. Number two, if I did do it, let's see where he goes. And he moved to RB2. And we did it. Yeah, he did it because I have him so high in the passing game. So it was like this like CMC role.
I'm super curious. Like, let's see. I'm gonna find out right now where he ends up for me doing that.
I bet you he's close. You probably have him high in the passing too.
I do. 261 rush attempts with that. Holy crap! He ended up RB5.
That's the fun part, is doing that. And then I love like showing people on the screen live, like this is why you do projections, because you may say he's gonna get 60%, but to really break down what 60% looks like, it's a lot of fucking touches.
There's not that many. See, that's the thing too, is I think another good thing about talking through the show and like projections and stuff is a lot of times when we'll even do our podcast and we'll sit here and be like, he's going to get 60% of the work, blah, blah, blah. We'll get like 35%, the sprinkle. And like we hear the work, and then there's a difference because this as much as I do, 60% of the entire touches is actually more than what you think about, because there's all these, like I said, ancillary. This is like the word of the day. Ancillary is, all these extra little 5 carries, 7 carries, 10 here, there, and everywhere. And if you're talking about true 60%, I mean, that's a massive volume. There's 5-6 running backs that you can truly say get 60% of the pure rushing.
Derrick Henry's one for sure. CMC, I think, hit it last year. But there's
Chubb's probably going to hit it this year.
Chubb hit Taylor. This year. Jacobs hit it last year.
Taylor, if he's healthy.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, we could say Bijan Robinson, but that might be about it. Maybe a healthy Najee Harris, because the first half of the season last year, and then once he got back to 100%, maybe, and that's maybe.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. And I said this on the podcast at the same time we were, showing that 60% projection. It's like you have to account for, the Amon-Ra St. Brown carries at the end zone, which is going to be like eight touches throughout the entire season. That's 2%, right? You have to talk about Jamison Williams, who's going to come in off a suspension, who might see 3 or 4 carries. That's going to be like 0.5% to 1%, right? And so you start adding up all these little pieces, including the quarterback and the quarterback twos, and then the receivers and the running backs and a tight end touch here and there. It's like, it's very hard to get to 60%. All right. Khalil Herbert, RB 38 for me, RB 28 for you. Again, ECR split between the two of us, 32, and ADP is actually below both of us, 39. So this breaks down to how we have this backfield divided. It's a 3-headed monster. We have Khalil Herbert, we have Foreman, and now we have Rashad Johnson. So I'm assuming it's just broken down to how we have this pie separated, but walk me through how yours is separated.
Yeah, so mine is, I still believe in Khalil Herbert. This is also something we sat here with the cautionary tale that said before the draft happens, trade Khalil Herbert. Because I was pumping him up so much that, like, if you could get high on RB2 value for him, it's like trade him. Like, this feels like one of those teams where you could look, and if they didn't draft Rashad Johnson, like, we would have been celebrating, but it just looked like this was an opening for them to ruin things. I think there's a little too much excitement of Rashad Johnson. I think that's the problem that people are falling into. And that's why you see his ADP as low as it is, that being Herbert's the shiny new toy, rookie running backs. But let's talk about Herbert as a player. And maybe this is just coming from somebody who, like, I look at the talent, I look at the production, I look at the fact that he was an RB1 and able to handle being an RB1 when David Montgomery went down. This is somebody who's been proven. Now, the Bears clearly don't want him to be that kind of running back. I think there's plenty of running backs like him, and no, I'm not putting him in the same tier talent-wise as these players, but DeAndre Swift, Travis Etienne, like, teams tell us they don't want them to be bell cow running backs, because that's how you get guys killed. Or what I always use as the cautionary tale is, let's go back to Lamar Miller from way back when everybody's like, give him all the touches, give him all the touches, give him all the touches. He goes to a new team, gets all the touches, but he puts up almost the same numbers because he's so less efficient.
Yep.
So I think that could be the concern for Herbert. That being said, I still have him leading the backfield. I still have Herbert getting 35% of the rushes and 10% of the target share. Maybe I'm wrong on that, and maybe Deonta Foreman gets involved more, but I don't think Foreman is anything more than the third option now. I think Johnson's going to truly be the 2 to Herbert's 1, and then Foreman kind of fall back by the wayside.
Yeah, it's funny that we're staying inside of the NFC North this entire podcast. That was not deliberate. We haven't ventured out. I agree with everything that you're saying. For me, I don't know where or who's going to step up in the passing game. Like Khalil, and I think that the RB1, I do think Khalil Herbert probably is the guy who's going to see the most, opportunity and target share between these three backs. What that is another story, because it's the Bears and we're not going to throw as much. Again, low expected pass rate. But I think whoever the RB1 is in this offense will be more efficient and produce more than where ADP is regardless, just because of the running lanes that are going to open from Justin Fields. And now that they have a more balanced attack with, acquiring DJ Moore, and they still have Cole Kmet. Claypool is probably another year in the system. Darnell Mooney is healthy now. So they have a few more weapons to be able to, balance this rushing attack. But my fear is that we see this three-headed monster, right? I do think, though, that Rashad Johnson eats more into Foreman than it does to Herbert. And I don't quote me on the stat, but I think Khalil Herbert was like RB5 or 6 last year through like the first 7 weeks in total rushing yards. Like, he looked really good. And so I know that he is a capable rusher. It's just, it breaks down to how much are we going to see, right? Because we have Justin Fields, who's going to rush for 22 to 24% of the rushing share, maybe more, maybe less. We have Khalil Herbert, who I have projected for 29% of the rushing share. We have Rashad Johnson, who I have projected for 20%. We have Foreman, whoever projects for 22%. It's like all of these 22, 23s, 20, 25s. Like, we can't really give anyone this large piece of this pie, because there is 3 heads. There is a rushing quarterback. So, like, nobody here is seeing that 60% that we just discussed. And so for me, it breaks down to just the amount of touches anyone in this backfield is going to see. I think it could be a rotation. I do think Herbert could win the job, but even if he wins that job, what does that role look like? And that's where I'm stuck on him.
Yeah, and I can definitely understand that. I think actually we didn't even talk about Travis Homer might be the biggest issue. If they slot in those two, if Homer beats out Foreman, as in being the game day active, and they're down to 3 running backs, and he gets involved because that's passing game. Clearly, you're not using Homer up between the tackles. That could be the real death knell to Khalil Herbert.
Yeah. Because none of these backs are really used in the passing game, right? We have Herbert, who saw 4.4%. I don't think Foreman has ever seen higher than 4.5% in his entire career. I think he was like 2% or something last year, without verifying the number in front of me. But it's all these backs, and then again, this offense in general, one of the lowest expected pass rates in the offense, which is why I'm a little bit lower on DJ Moore than consensus this year. Like, love the talent, love the player, but just don't like the landing spot. And even giving this offense a boost in efficiency in the passing game, he just didn't do it for me. Well, we'll get to him in a little bit. Let's move on to Rashad Penny. This one, we actually have a big difference in our rankings. It's probably our biggest amongst everyone we're discussing today. And I like Penny. Doesn't sound like it based upon this number, but RB46, RB46 in my projections, RB33 in yours. ECR is RB37, ADP is RB34. Again, this breaks down to just one. The issue with Penny, and the only issue with Penny, is health. If we knew that Penny would play 16 games, if you told me today, little fairy landed on my shoulder, something had a vision, Rashad Penny playing 16 games, I would probably put him in the top 5 in RBs, because I believe in the talent. I think he's that good of a player. He's dynamic. He just can't stay healthy. He's averaged over 6 yards a carry for the last 2 years. Yes, it's been, reduced amount of touches because of health, but still, we saw that run down in 2021 when Jonathan Taylor, was the next year was the consensus RB1. Penny actually finished ahead of him in fantasy points down the stretch. He had that amazing run during that time. And so I love Penny, but I don't think he's going to play 16 games, 15 games, even 14 games. On top of it, we have Swift, we have Gainwell, who they liked and who showed up in the playoffs. They've re-signed Scott. So we have this now 4-headed monster. Yes, they have a great offensive line, which is, I think, going to help all of them. Nonetheless, though, Sirianni has shown that he loves to rotate backs in, especially in goal line packages. We saw Gainwell come in and snipe Miles Sanders last year. We saw Scott get rotated in. Don't forget, we still have a rushing quarterback. And so when I look at this projection, I look at this offense, we're finally outside of the NFC North, by the way. But when I take a look at it, again, it just breaks down to Jalen Hurts, 25% rushing share, DeAndre Swift, mid-20s, Gainwell's in the mid-teens. We have Penny's is the only one I have above 30% of the rushing share. And so how does your projection break down? I'm curious where we're different on the numbers, and if it's also a cluster. This is a big cluster, though, so I think we're different on numbers.
Yeah, so there's two different things at play here. So looking at Miles Sanders last year, we know that like there could be somebody clearly in the lead that could be an RB1. He just did it, and it wasn't only the fact that he went from 0 touchdowns to 11 rushing touchdowns. Like that wasn't. There was him staying healthy. He did see a bigger share than the year before, but it wasn't massive. But nothing you said is wrong. What it comes down to is why I said there's two different things at play here. So I am for 34% of the rushing share. I have DeAndre Swift for 26. That's not that far off, which also, by the way, to go back to our previous discussion, when you're taking 26, 27% of the pie immediately away for Jalen Hurts. So this is one of those situations where you can say 34% is by far the most of all the running backs for Rashad Penny, because next closest is 25. And then after that, game will only have for 7.5%. So
that's the difference.
Yeah, that's a big difference right there. I'm assuming, by the way, you're shaking your head and saying that's the big difference there. So when you say that, that's 34%, which is only of what you're talking about, 73% left over. So he is almost like a 55% share running back, but it's again of things not including Hurts. So that's one factor. The other is just honestly, if I'm drafting, which this is what I tell people too, is like when it comes down to like I actually stopped with some of the like you won't see me on the accuracy this year, Billy. I stopped because I wanted to help. Like I was focusing more on like, look, this is exactly how I would play players. This is exactly how I would rank and draft players. And I'm not saying don't do it, Billy. If you finish number 1 again, you deserve all the credit. It's amazing. It's an amazing accomplishment to finish that. But I just wanted to give people like, this is where my accuracy started to fall apart, is because I'd rather take shots in this area. Like if you just said it, if Rashad Penny stayed healthy, forget 16, 13
12
games. Yeah, it's a massive return, because I'm looking at the people I have behind him. Elijah Mitchell. Okay, you could argue the same thing. If Christian McCaffrey goes down in week 1, massive return. But what's the return on Damian Harris? What's the return on Devin Singletary? What's the return on Jeff Wilson? And that's why, like all these names here, and even a few just in front of Penny, like I'm not the biggest Cook guy, because what's the biggest return on Cook? That he finishes RB 18 maybe? Like he's never going to be, because it's Buffalo, that big. What's the biggest return on AJ Dillon is one that you could argue with Penny, because if Aaron Jones goes down in week 2. But the thing where I'll also go one step further is all those names, the ones where I said have similar upside to Penny, is theirs is somebody has to get hurt. Penny's is he just has to stay healthy. He's the one that can't get hurt. So that's really
I don't know which is worse.
Like, I would bet money as of today he's not playing the full season, but that's why I only am for 35% and not 45%.
That's true. Does the contract scare you at all? They only brought him in for $600,000 guaranteed. Max contract is $2.1 million. It's enough. It's low enough to cut somebody. And they added Swift inside of the draft, pretty much for only moving back 30 picks in round 7. It was ridiculous, but it's
look at it this way. What we're talking about right here, when you said at the top of the show about August, if camp comes around and he hasn't been able to get on the field, nagging hamstring, blah, blah. Yeah. And he barely practices this all season. There is a world where you just said at the contract, there is a world, like, let's be clear. You're drafting today. This is a zero-sum game potentially for you. Like this is by August, you could have no running back because Penny might not be on this team. You are not wrong about that.
Yeah, I think he makes it. I think they rotate them all in. I think that they're all, if you think about it.
Yeah, but if he never gets on there, like, we'll just cut it. We're done with this hamstring crap. He can't even get on the field. Like that.
The way I look at it is you're probably not going to get a full season of Swift and Penny combined.
That is true.
So they really only have 3 running backs on the team.
Combined for
Scott.
16 games. That's what we were saying. Yeah, draft Gainwell. Just draft Boston Scott. He always gets all the goal line rushes when the lead option goes down.
It was like my underdog team last year. I finished in the finals for the playoff challenge, and I went all 3 running backs in this backfield. I went Gainwell, Sanders, Scott.
I've had Scott on
someone's
so
gonna
many
score.
best ball teams the last 2 years just because when somebody gets hurt, they just always turn to him at the goal line.
Yeah, and like he gets and it's not even hurt. Like he just random goal line touches too. It's like,
Yeah.
It'll be like, the 3rd touchdown of the day for the running back, and here comes Boston Scott. It's like, okay, there goes all my Miles Sanders hope and glory that I had for him for another touchdown. Okay, let's move on to receiver. So it looks like we have very similar thoughts on Penny. We just have the pie broken up slightly different. The biggest one was Gainwell, actually. And if I recall, you had Scott 1 spot ahead of Gainwell in your rankings. I think you had 63 and 64. So if you don't mind, let's talk about Gainwell because I have him at RB 60. So I have him. So you and I are swapped on Scott and Gainwell. I think that he earned the trust of the coaches last year from playoffs. I mean, he was being utilized quite a bit inside the playoff run. So you don't expect it to carry over, it sounds like.
I like Gainwell. I just don't know that I expect anything to continue completely with this backfield outside of the only, like I'm looking at, okay, Swift, Penny, Gainwell, Scott. Where is the world for them to trust Gainwell as half the share? I mean, this kind of goes back to kind of like the conversation before, like I was talking about ETN and, some running backs never getting that kind of work because that's not what they're built for. That's not James Cook. It's good. Like, that's why I've never been high on James Cook. I like James Cook, but in fantasy purposes, so overdrafted because of the excitement. I don't disagree with your take on Gainwell. I keep going back to, like, let's say it got down to Penny doesn't make the team because he can't stay healthy. Let's say he's a non-factor week 1. And now it's down to Swift, Gainwell, and Scott. So I think Gainwell in that scenario, even if both are healthy, I think Gainwell standalone, he's the one that's going to be consistent. My concern is if it's down to Gainwell and Scott, I just believe, and we've seen that Scott is the lead touchdown inside the 10-yard line equity guy. So that really is the only slight difference here is that, again, it's what are the possible outcomes? You kind of like Pat May always says this, like, create the story, like go through your story of how does this happen for said player. And I just don't necessarily see a world where Gainwell gets past like RB 25 to 30, where Boston Scott would be Jamal Williams rolling the dice. You're hoping for touchdowns and it could go completely wrong. But there's a world where Boston Scott and Kenneth Gainwell splitting that backfield and Scott ends up as a borderline RB1, which again, it's not a world that's probably going to happen. It's like universe, 1534 that we don't even know about, but
filled with marijuana and beer. Yeah, no, I got Gainwell technically, and I've looked at this a few times. I have him for 71 carries, which would be a career high. His previous high at that point was, 68? Let me double check that number. 68. Yeah, 68 and 53. And so
for about half that.
Yeah, that's good. That's okay. And so, I mean, but he is, if you look at this backfield, he's kind of a hybrid, right? He doesn't have the 2-down role. He doesn't have the 3-down or the 3rd-down back role anymore because Swift is there. So I can see a scenario where he could be the odd man out in this backfield because of his skill set being overlapped by Penny and by Swift. So it's a good look at things, and it makes me want to take a look at Gainwell a bit more. Okay, let's move along to receivers. And we're finally, again, like I said, we've been out of the NFC North now. We're going to talk about first receiver is Christian Watson. So you and I are close on this one. The rest of the group is not. So I have him as wide receiver 15. I'm slightly higher than you. Again, probably a cluster thing. ECR is wide receiver 29. So they're 11 spots behind you. ADP is closer to us, wide receiver 19. Why is ECR wrong?
I don't know what's going on with this. I actually thought I was going to be low on Christian Watson, having him as a mid-low wide receiver too, because of what he did last year, scoring 2 touchdowns a game almost. Just so like when he was actually a full-time starter. Yes, Aaron Rodgers is gone. We are talking about Jordan Love. I think might have just come down to how scared people are of Jordan Love. Maybe that's what it is. Now, to be clear, I only have Jordan Love throwing for 26.5 touchdowns. Like, I'm not having him walk into this job and throw 35 or 30 even. But if you look at Aaron Rodgers last year, Jordan Love's touchdown rate is actually right around there. It was a down year for Aaron Rodgers. So if you are concerned about Jordan Love and you're like, this is why I have the customizable projections, is because like you go in there and you're like, no, Jordan Love is not going to have a 7.4 touchdown percentage. He's going to have 5.4. He's going to struggle the entire year and throw 20 touchdowns. Boom, you knock down Christian Watson from 7.4 to 5, and now he's dropped almost 10 spots. I'm throwing these random numbers out. I didn't actually, you know what? Let's just do it right now. I'm going to do it. Let's say he throws for 5% touchdown share, which makes 18 passing touchdowns on the year. And that drops, that actually drops Christian Watson under 5 touchdowns. That actually drops him down. Ooh, this is not going to be pretty. I can just tell you, let's do it. So that drops him down to 4 touchdowns for me, which would move Christian Watson all the way down to wide receiver 27. Just like
still
that.
Higher than ECR.
It's still higher, but not that much more. But I mean, he fell out. He went from 18 to 27, dropped almost 10 spots. That was pretty good on that. 10 spots almost, just by changing that touchdown share. I think Christian Watson is the number 1 guy. The concern with Jaden Reed, who I think could be the number 2, is more for Dobbs, not for Christian Watson. I think Christian 100%. Watson is clearly the alpha. I think we're talking about Dobbs versus Reed cannibalizing each other. So that might be the biggest thing for everybody. I'm fine. And maybe this is a good buy. And this ADP, by the way, if you're playing Dynasty, this is a good buy opportunity. If you're seeing the ADP there, you might be able to go get Christian Watson cheap for the perception.
Yeah, there's 258 vacated targets in this offense after everything's said and done this offseason. And I agree with you 100%. Reed is going to be cannibalizing Dobbs more than anything. Watson, I have projected, and this is a pretty modest projection, I think, 22% of the target share. There's a scenario where this is closer to 24%, in my opinion, which if we did that, he's now probably a back end, wide receiver 1 in my projections. It's the touchdown upside that we just can't project well for Watson, because it's like what he did last year was unsustainable, right? But we did see the chemistry with Love, even in the game that they played together, where he hit him across the middle of the field for that long touchdown, destroyed my DFS team. But it did.
Always comes back to us.
Yes. I mean, because there's a scenario where he's, a 12 touchdown guy, but there's also a scenario where, we see Love, who maybe isn't as efficient as we were hoping for. And he sees more of that, low 4% touchdown rate or even high 3, even a worst case scenario. But I haven't projected for 6.6 touchdowns. That is a bit on the lower side because I think it breaks down to the touchdown rate that I have for Love. I have Love at 4.4%, which is 23.8 touchdowns. Again, though, it's one of those things that you kind of have to look at and say, can Christian Watson elevate that number for Love? We saw it happen last year. We saw it how boom bust he was in that. I should just say boom. He wasn't even bust. How boom he was in that category. Can he sustain it? That's the question. That the rate he did was unsustainable, but can he even maintain 60% of that, 50% of that?
Right.
And he could still be in double-digit touchdowns. So, glad to see we're on the same page there. Next receiver I want to talk about is Diontae Johnson. This one is a big difference for us as well. I'm at wide receiver 22. You're at wide receiver 42. ECR is 28. ADP is 38. So there's not a single one. ADP is closer to you in terms of ranking, but that's the closest that we have. Everything else is either off by 10 or more. Why? I understand that why you might be low on Deontay Johnson, but break it down for me.
You want to do like what the comments usually do? Why do you hate Diontae Johnson? This one pains me too, because if anybody knows me since basically his rookie season, it's Deontay, because I love him so much. I love the player. This is the biggest problem here, is there's somebody I hate on this team. I hate the player, Kenny Pickett. Sorry, Kenny Pickett. I hope you prove me wrong. Please prove me wrong. But never liked him in college, never wrote him up last year. I was one of the biggest haters, if you want to say that. And I still overprojected Diontae Johnson last year because I thought he could be quarterback proof. And he clearly wasn't. For everybody out there, I have him catching 59.2% of his passes this year. That would be an improvement. That's how bad it was last year. 58.5% of his receptions last year. Maybe he can get back to 60, 61, but it just comes down to Kenny Pickett. I just don't believe in Kenny Pickett. I have Diontae Johnson for 22% of the shares. Let's also remember, Kenny Pickett, go back and shock people. Dude didn't even throw for 10 touchdowns. This was miserable last year. And I think it just gets overlooked. I'm not saying you're overlooking it, because I could just be a hater of Kenny Pickett and just maybe he takes off in year 2. And I'm not even saying takes off in the fact that he needs to be a top 10 quarterback. But I have this team running 1,065 plays, passing about 55% of the time. But the problem I have is I have 360 completions. That's it for Kenny Pickett. That's 3,700 yards for Kenny Pickett, 18 touchdowns, which is more than double what he did last year. And that's the biggest thing. These are actually improvements. He has to make a giant improvement for this to be anything. And that's what it comes down to. I love Deontay Johnson. I just hate this team. I hate what this is going to do to Diontae Johnson, George Pickens, and the rest. And I don't even think Allen Robinson's that big of a factor. I'm not that worried about Allen Robinson. I'm just worried about Kenny Pickett. That's 100% what it comes down to.
Yeah, Allen Robinson doesn't matter. It's I'm the same with you.
He was the example of being quarterback proof for the longest time until he wasn't.
Until he went to a good quarterback, and then he wasn't quarterback.
And then he wasn't.
It's lost a step. I get it. I understand why. I think, when you said, paint the picture, or I forgot the quote that you said earlier, that you want to
create the narrative, create your story.
Create the narrative. Yeah. So my narrative here is that the Steelers went out and invested in offensive line, right? They went out and got Broderick Jones in pick 14. They drafted Darnell Washington, who's a blocker, right? And so they then go out and they get another offensive tackle in round 7. So they went and bolstered this offensive line, which will give Pickett more time to throw the ball. It'll give them a little bit more opportunity to rush the ball, because we saw Najee Harris getting just tackled behind the line of scrimmage last year at the line. This offensive line was horrible last year. And so I expect them to be much improved, which in turn would help all of the other offensive players in this team, Najee Harris in particular, and then of course all the pass catchers who are going to have more time to get the ball down the field. Looks like our biggest difference is in the projections. I think you said you had him at 59% catch rate.
Yeah,
catch percentage. So I'm at 60.5. So that's where it is. 1.5% is the difference. Where do you have him in target share? I'm at 26%.
That was 22, I believe. Let me go back. I'll double check for you. So I can run down the list. 22.1, Pickens 17.7, Allen Robinson at 12.2. That's for Allen Robinson's sake. That's non-existent. I mean, to have 12% of the target share for Allen Robinson.
I went lower.
And so I'm assuming lower there. The other one is, what do you have, Najee? I have Najee Harris for over 10% of the target share.
10 and a half Najee.
Okay. And then I have 15.3 for Pat Freiermuth. So it sounds like the biggest
16.5 for me.
Okay. So this sounds like the biggest difference just might be what's left of Allen Robinson. If he's completely left out of it, I just don't know that they don't find another solution here. If Diontae Johnson gets, what'd you say? You had 26?
26. Yeah. On the dot.
Here, I'll do it right now. And I'll just even tell you, this is what the fun of this is all about.
Yeah. I think it was the Allen Robinson difference. I gave him 9%.
So that would actually put Allen Robinson right at 9%. So that boosts for me Diontae Johnson up to, he only gets him to 32 though. I have him for 4 receiving touchdowns. I just don't have Kenny Pickett even throwing 20 touchdowns. And again, that would be a massive improvement. So it comes down to how many touchdowns. I still think this is going to be a very run balanced team as it has been. My biggest, everything you argued about the offensive line was actually why I have Najee Harris as a top 10 running back this year. I truly believe he wasn't healthy to about the midpoint of the season with that Liz Frank. So my positive outlook for this team is more for Harris than it is for anything in this passing game. Please, again, prove me wrong, Kenny Pickett. Please do. I root for players. I don't want to hate and see their careers fail, but I just don't believe in him, and that's the biggest problem.
Yeah, our biggest is touchdowns. I did give him close to 5, which is closer to 5 than he had last year. He had 0 last year, which was just the crazy. I don't expect him. I mean, because prior to that, and I understand different quarterbacks, but he had 8, 7, 5. I have him just around 5 this year. So low, it would be, 5 more than last year, but still lower on his career numbers. I mean, if you gave him just even 3 last year or 4, I don't think he's even close to the top 40 being drafted this year. I probably think he's being drafted as a back end, wide receiver 2, high end 3, probably jumps up 10 spots in ADP alone, just if he had 3 touchdowns last year. But I think people are soured in general. But I can understand your narrative as well. I see it. There's a real scenario it happens. I am going to. I just like Diontae Johnson a lot as well. So I'm betting on the talent here. Him being a target hog.
I would love to be wrong on that.
Another one that I hope I'm wrong on, but based on the numbers, he moved down in my rankings after being traded, was DJ Moore. So a lot of people are expecting to see an A.J. Brown effect that we saw last year when he joined with Philadelphia Eagles. But for me, it breaks down to pass attempts and volume in this offense. I mentioned earlier, Chicago, for me, has the third lowest expected pass rate in the league. I have him for 517 passing attempts, which is a big jump from last year. It's not like this receiving core is completely empty either, right? They still have Darnell Mooney. They still have Cole Kmet. They went out and traded for Claypool last year, and I understand Claypool didn't really do anything, but there's still bodies here, and it's not like I have DJ Moore projected for this low rate. I have him for, let me pull it up. I have him for 26% of the target share, but 26% of what I say, 517 just isn't a lot. And so tell me I'm wrong here, because you have him a lot higher than I do. I want to hear your reasoning.
So the percentages aren't that far off. What do you have him for touchdowns? I'm curious now.
Touchdowns, I have him for 6.2.
Boom. There you go. Number 8. So I have Justin Fields close to, we do fractions, obviously, because this is all based on percentages and stuff like that. But I have him for 23.5 passing touchdowns. How many do you have Fields for? Do you have lower than that, I'm assuming?
21.2. Yep.
Yeah, so there you go. And I have probably a little bit higher touchdown share for DJ Moore. So not that far apart, but this is another thing I'll bring up. This is also where projections and ranks will differ for me. Now that I'm starting, I don't know if people have heard me typing in the background and trying to add some of these as we've been talking, because the teams aren't 100% done across the board. But as of right now, DJ Moore for me in projections is 23. I would actually still draft him where I have him, where you have in my ranks, because this comes down to who's he ahead of in my ranks. Maybe I should probably flip him and Christian Watson, but I kind of played the factor of like, if I'm drafting today, I'm still taking, we just went through why we love Christian Watson. If I'm drafting up today, I know who DJ Moore is. I believe in Justin Fields is taking yet another step forward in an offense that's been designed for him. He's had more time. Like 2 years ago, this was a transitioning offense. And we're talking about, I know a quarterback, I know a player versus a question at quarterback, and a question of consistency in the second season for Watson. And then I go back behind DJ Moore after that. Keenan Allen, I think he's on the downturn of his career. Jerry Jeudy, who, speaking of can't stay healthy, Tyler Lockett at 21, even still, like, I feel like we undervalue Tyler Lockett, but at the same time, even undervalue him at 21, he's still over consensus because it's just Tyler Lockett. But Hopkins is on the downturn. Deebo Samuel, I think last year's more of what we have to expect of Deebo Samuel going forward. So anyway, I'm bringing it up to say is my projections are behind, but where I would draft him is because I still believe in some of those players are actually in front of them in projections. It just comes down to what I believe in as DJ Moore. And this is also, Billy, I don't even know this, but for 3 straight years, I was called the DJ Moore hater because I would just rank him at wide receiver 18 because he always finished wide receiver 18. Any given week, he would finish at wide receiver 5 or wide receiver 40. But I was like, I'm done trying to figure this dude out. He is just wide receiver 18, copy paste. Let's move on. So I guess I'm now the DJ Moore proponent. I know.
You said, okay, 18, but now he's in a better offense. Let's go up one spot.
Go one spot higher.
All right. I know you have to run, but I want to talk about one more player. So we'll do this kind of rapid fire. Talk me off the cliff. I have Godwin at wide receiver 14. You're at 30. ECR is 20. ADP is 29. Talk me down.
The quick version of this 100% comes down to how many touchdowns does this offense score. I think this is going to be very much like the Pittsburgh Steelers, whether it's Trask or Mayfield, probably likely Mayfield as of today. Just 100%. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin were both down because of touchdowns. That's all it comes down to.
Okay. I'll take a look at the numbers. Well, Jake, thanks for joining me. I really like talking projections. Thank you for coming on the show, dedicating the time. It's much appreciated. Why don't you tell the listeners what you're working on and where to find you?
Yeah, well, fortunately, because I got this sling on because I only got one arm. So my projections are done as of right now. Well, by the time you hear this show, my projections are done. And I just said done. I was like, wait, hold on. But they're done. So that's going to be a little bit of a break for me. You can go dig through them and have fun over at The Athletic. And I'll still tweet with one hand. So there you go, at All In Kid. Oh, you forgot to ask me. That comes from poker, by the way. I saw that you had that in notes. You forgot to ask me. That comes from poker.
Forget to ask that.
The first tournament I ever played in with some buddies, they gave nicknames to everybody. And I was young and it's just like, oh, I have a good hand, all in. I have a bad hand, all in. Like, it's just like, and somebody just sitting at the table just went, damn, all in, kid. And then boom, it just stuck from there. So it comes from poker.
You're a wild card is what that is.
Pretty much.
2-7, all in.
All in, bluffing. You're never going to see it coming.
That's awesome. Well, Jake, again, thanks for joining the show. Appreciate your time. Loved your insights on the players. Always a pleasure. Everyone, thanks for tuning into the Dominator, and we'll see you all back here next week.